Well, hi guys. Hello, welcome. Today, my first guest of the first episode of Podcast 14 Questions is gonna be Mr. John Miliken. First of all, thank you all for supporting and thank you all for watching. A brief summary of the podcast 14 questions. In this podcast, we are asking 14 questions maximum, and all questions are mainly related about life. Okay, Mr. John, thank you so much for joining me on my first episode of the podcast. And please introduce yourself to the audience.
My name's John Miliken, and I am teaching presently at LCC International University in Klaipeda. So that's how I know the host actually of this show. I don't know if he'll say more about that or not. And my background is in philosophy, and so I teach courses that have, in one way or another, something to do with philosophy. I've got a wife. I've got a couple of kids who are just about to be teenagers. One of them is anyway, and so I live here in Klaipeda.
Thank you so much. All right, let's begin. First question is actually to me in this podcast. What a selfish act from me, but why did I choose you to be my guest and a first guest? I would really love to know his subjective opinion on life and how he sees the world. I want to learn about him. I'm really interested in him, and I want to share all his knowledge to you. So let's begin with the first question, Mr. John. What is definition of successful and meaningful life?
Well, like a lot of these questions, I suppose hard to say really, really briefly, but I will do my best to do so. And actually would pull these two things apart a little bit. So successful and meaningful. And maybe if I could start with successful. I, I'm a Christian. I think about all of life through that kind of a lens. And so I think if we could put it in the most simple terms, a successful life is a life where we live how we were made to live. So I think understanding successful life begins with understanding who we as human beings are. And I believe that we as human beings were made by God to know Him, to love Him, to worship Him. And I think a successful life at its most basic level is one where we do that. And there's so much that can flow out of that. But according to that definition, a successful life can be someone who lots of people know and makes a big difference in the world. It can be someone who nobody knows and doesn't seem to make any particular outward difference in the world that other people might see. But that the fundamental thing is the way that we relate to our Creator. So meaningful. I think that maybe when we're talking about meaningful life, people often have in mind a couple of different things. And one of them is that somehow our life makes an impact, it makes a difference somehow. And we often feel like life is meaningful if we're not doing anything. You know, if I spent my whole life sitting in a room watching television, we might say, what a meaningless life. And related to that idea, I suppose, is the idea of having a purpose, so that I'm supposed to be doing something. I live for something, and it makes a difference to other people in some way. So I think there all kinds of lives can be meaningful in that sense. And again, you won't be surprised, and maybe we could say more about this later, that for me, I would come back to thinking of my purpose in life and my significance ultimately in sort of terms that would relate to God in some way. But I think a lot of what to me feels meaningful about life would be familiar to anyone, you know, being able to do things that make a difference in the world for other people.
Thank you so much. Um, it's really interesting that successful life and meaningful life usually is explained by something not materialistic. And that is what makes sense. Of course, people explain it in a materialistic ways, and a lot of us do. But really, connecting life, meaning of life, to something spiritual, something connected to soul, is what really makes sense. Thank you for your answer. All right, let's ask the third question, excuse me. If you could offer a newborn child one piece of advice and they would remember this advice their whole life, what advice would you give them?
Maybe I would say something like this: do your very best to try to draw near to God, and then do whatever it is He tells you to do. So I think this dual dynamic of trying to open ourselves up to what God would say to us and being willing to then respond is really the key dynamic of human life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, and if you could give yourself, your 18-year-old self, an advice, you're just holding a conversation with your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've got to think about myself as 18. When I think back about that season of my life, I think I often experienced a kind of a conflict. And maybe this is familiar with a lot of people of inside of sort of things that I kind of half wanted to do, but on another level feel like I probably shouldn't do and don't really want to do. But it's sort of easy path, and other things that on some level I felt like I really should do and really want to do, but on other levels it was difficult to do. And I think I might say to that 18-year-old self, really have the courage, have the I don't know what that does. Maybe courage is the best word for this,
Mm-hmm.
to like grab hold of the things that you really know are the things that you should be doing and the things you should be pursuing and the way you should be going, and be ruthless about kind of cutting out of your life the stuff that really um, is a distraction for you
Mm-hmm.
and really is not helpful to you or helpful to other people around you.
Okay. You know what I have noticed from my personal experience is that from 18 to 21, my growth was huge. Growth, it was in a bad way and in a good way at the same time, but I changed so much.
Yeah,
Should
yeah.
we 21-year-olds expect later years to also bring a very drastic change from like it was from 18 to 21, or does it get lower and lower and lower as you grow up?
Yeah, this is a good question. I find that in my own life, I'm always surprised at how much I still learn in any given year.
Mm-hmm.
This last year, for example, has been like personally a really important year. And I've processed a lot of stuff. I feel like I've understood things about myself that I hadn't understood for until now.
Mm-hmm.
And as I back up, I feel like almost every year I can say that. So it's a little hard for me, honestly, to remember, okay, 18 to 21 is much closer for you, to say what changed for me during those years. I'm sure plenty of things did. But for me, I've experienced life as being this continuous process of change. And I think there's nothing inevitable about that. So I think a lot of it has to do with us having the intentionality to constantly be pursuing that. So we're reading things, we're having conversations, we're opening ourselves up to what still am I not seeing? What still do I need to understand? How can my relationships get healthier? How can I stop having that being angry with people in this? There are always things in our lives that we can work on. And as we do that kind of work, I think we make discoveries,
Mm-hmm.
and we're always growing. So I won't be surprised if you were to talk to me, and when I'm 65, I might say, oh yes, let me tell you about how much I've learned in the
Mm-hmm.
last few years. So I think
All
it
right.
can be a lifelong thing.
All right. So I should expect a lot more changes, and that's good.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. Thank you so much. All right. So, uh, if you were an employer, right, and you were employing a person, young or old, does not really matter. What I want to
Yeah.
know is what kind of personal characteristics would you look for in a person you're hiring?
Mm. So there's a couple that come to my mind right away, and I
Mm-hmm.
probably could expand on this list, but I think of maybe integrity as being at the top of the list. Like, I want someone who, when they tell me something, then
Mm-hmm.
I can depend on that 100%. They're not going
Okay.
to lie to me. Um, dependability. So they tell me I will be there Monday morning at 8 o'clock, then they will absolutely be there Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and not 8:05, not, not show up and I won't hear from them. Like, absolutely will do what they say they will do. And then I think maybe if I could confine myself to three, because again, I could go on. There's a kind of independence and initiative, that you hope that an employee can kind of see what needs to be done, and you don't have to tell them every little thing and every little step. Like, they kind of understand what's going on, and they can do things before you have to tell them, and take that initiative and sort of get excited and get engaged with the work that they're doing. So those are off the top of my head, I'd say those are kind of top
Those
three.
two. No, you mentioned two, right? Integrity and kind of
Integrity,
self-driven.
dependability, and
Dependability.
initiative.
All right, I see. So integrity, dependability, and initiative. Interesting. Okay, if you could ask a person only one question with a goal to know about him or her as much as possible. You are asking one question to a person, and your goal is to know him the best you can. What question do you ask him?
I think I would ask, tell me your story. And I would probably have to elaborate on that question a bit, because I don't know about you. If I ask you that question, you might think, I'm not sure what he means by that. But to hear how someone would tell kind of the story of their life, what's how have they gotten to where they are? What do they think of as being the important themes in their life? Where do they see themselves going? So sometimes people need a little coaching on that question, but often I think people can do real well with that. But I think that gives you some insight into what they're interested in, what they've struggled with, what their hard things have been, what their good things have been, and kind of where their dreams and their passions are sort of leading them going forward.
Are you more interested in how they tell story of themselves, or what the story consists of?
I suspect that you can learn interesting things from both of those. But I guess as I'm thinking about the question, I would like to know, like, what's the actual content. But it is interesting if, you ask someone, tell me your story, and they say, for example, well, I graduated from high school with, top honors in my class, and I got into this school, and and they sort of, their story is very narrowly focused on maybe their academic success. Then that tells you something interesting. And someone else, maybe they say, tell me your story, and they say, oh, I had such a miserable childhood, and their story is full of all the things that they've suffered. So I think that both of those give you something interesting. But maybe if I weren't being sneaky, it would be the content that I would be interested in hearing about.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting question. You can learn a lot about person with that question for sure. I mean, depends on the person as well. They might give you one sentence answer, but
that's right. That's not too much to learn from that.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Next question is, if a person who knows you was to describe you, what would he or she say?
Is the person who knows me long-winded, or they very concise?
Sorry, I did not get that question, to be honest.
Yeah, is this a person who talks a lot, or a person who talks a little?
Let's say a person who talks a little and knows you really well.
A little. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about this. My wife is off screen here. She's in the room reading while I'm doing this, and she's someone who probably knows me better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining, like, what would she say if someone asked her to describe me? Yeah, I don't know. This is a difficult question. Because it's hard for us to imagine what do other people see and what sticks out to them when they think about us. I think she might say I'm a thoughtful person. I am a kind person. She would probably say there's a lot of things I know about him that the rest of you don't know. It might surprise you in some ways. And I think she would say that I'm someone who's a central kind of motivation for me, a central focus of my life, at least as long as I've known her, has been, things I touched upon in the first couple of questions, like pursuing connection with God and knowing who God is and trying to be responsive to that in my life. Obviously, not perfectly in any of those ways, but that's a pretty central theme for me.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who knew me well would notice that.
If happiness was a national currency, what kind of work would make you billionaire?
Mm. Well, you won't be surprised to hear this, but I love to teach, and uh, if you were to talk to my kids, they would tell you that I'm always teaching them.
Mm-hmm.
We have a whiteboard near our dining room table that's like up on the wall there, and which is awesome. So there's like some markers. There's a whiteboard there. So very often I eat breakfast with my kids every morning. Very often something will come up. Actually, I take that back. This semester I don't on Monday, Wednesday, Friday because I have an early class, but usually I do. And I just will start to teach them about something that comes up in our conversation and draw pictures and things like that. And probably more than they would like me to do at times. But so I love to teach and to help people understand things. I guess this is what to me is really, really enjoyable. But there are a lot of things that I do like as well, like doing, could list in addition to that. But I think opportunities to teach, especially people who are interested in learning. Obviously, that's the most fun.
All right. So you have found something you love to do, you could say.
Yeah, yeah,
All
for
right.
sure. Teaching is something, there's this expression that we teachers say amongst ourselves that we teach for free and we get paid to grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's absolutely true that teaching, for me is something that I would do without pay. It's
Okay.
we have to eat and we all, need an income and sometimes. But if I were like had no need for any income, and were independently wealthy or something, I would still teach. It's a pleasurable thing.
Wow, that was really powerful. So you would teach even if you did not get paid. That means a lot. That means a lot. Actually, there's an follow-up question. I want to know: is there a type of hobby or something you do for fun that would like really amaze people who don't really know you that close? Like maybe you, I don't know, play basketball when you read them. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think unfortunately the answer is no. There's probably, I mean, I have hobbies and things that I do, but they probably wouldn't amaze or surprise anyone. I'm a real walker and I like to wander
Mm-hmm.
in the city. So most days I'll go for a walk, and days when I have more time, I'll go for a longer walk. So for me to just to walk and to think is really something I do. I play piano and guitar, so I
Oh,
do music, enjoy that,
great.
and I read. So these are when I'm not otherwise occupied. These are the sorts of things you'll find me doing.
Okay, good. So we now learned that you play piano and guitar. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the compliment that you would most appreciate?
Am I allowed to turn these questions around to you and say, "Well, I don't know, Nika. What do you think? What would you say?"
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Someone is,
I'm not ready to answer these questions. I'm.
yeah.
I'm not. I'm
At
not
some
good.
point, someone needs to interview you, right? I don't know if this is if I'm going into a different category here. In a way that what I get most excited about is when I hear from someone else that my teaching has made a difference to them.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, okay, I understand something now that I didn't understand before, or I really had an insight here, or my eyes opened about this, or I felt inspired, that sort of stuff. So I guess it would be that sort of thing. So if someone were to say, hey, that really, you really made that clear for me, or now I really understand something important, and that probably
Okay,
would be something in that
so
area.
that will make you happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to know.
Well, I've heard a lot of students behind your back saying good stuff about you.
Oh, that's great. Those are somehow maybe some of the safest compliments. If we get too many compliments in front of our back, then maybe it's not always helpful to us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So,
Mm.
describe to me in detail your dream house. Something that you own, like that type of house that you create with your own
Yeah.
hands.
I don't know how detailed I can be. I can give you some general characteristics that I know for sure are there.
Okay. Let's say location, material it's built on,
Yeah.
next to the sea, in the forest, maybe in the city.
Okay.
How many rooms, how big it is, what type of rooms there will be, would you live with?
Yeah. Okay, maybe I can start with the house itself and then think a little bit about the
Mm-hmm.
context for it. So I like old things.
Okay.
So and I like to work on things, houses. I kind of grew up that way. My parents kind of redid a couple of houses, and
Mm-hmm.
the house that I lived in the US before we moved here, I redid every inch of the house inside.
Okay.
And so I think my dream house would be something that was built a few hundred years ago and needed some work. So needed to
Okay.
be replastered, needed like some repainting and stuff that I could sort of work on. And part of the reason why I think old appeals to me is because I like character. And new things don't have much character. They don't have a history. Um, they often are much sort of stylistically, the materials are cheap. They're not very interesting. Whereas in an old house, you have things like stone and brick and plaster and wood. In the
Mm-hmm.
new houses, you have sort of concrete and particle board and plastic, and these
Yeah.
things are materials that are not so satisfying for me. So something like that, something that has a beauty. Beauty is really important to me. So I would love a home that has beauty to it and that it has the kind of materials that get better the older they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, wood, wood floors. It doesn't. I wouldn't necessarily like a very large house because, of course, it's a lot of work, especially if you're modeling and working
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of the house. But I like I like a cozy house, and I don't know what that word even means
Yeah,
to
yeah.
many
I
people,
feel
but
you. I
it's
feel
hard
you.
hard to define that.
Uh-huh.
And with a space, it's nice to have a space where you can gather people, sort of a room that has a fireplace in it, that has couches. 10 or 12 people can be in there and you can have conversation and you can, just hang out and
Mm-hmm.
spend time like that. It needs to have a room of that kind. Where would it be located? I guess in the country, not too far from a city, but in the
Mm-hmm.
country where it's quiet, where there's peace, where there's woods, where there's a field. That would probably be ideal.
Okay.
Um, and I'd live there with my family. I guess that part's easy.
Mm-hmm. Would you have a specific type of room, maybe? Like specifically for something?
Library would be nice,
Yeah.
you know. Um,
Library would be nice.
and again, doesn't have to be a huge library, but a room with lots of bookshelves and
Mm-hmm.
maybe a desk in it, someplace where one could read quietly, work, that sort of thing.
Okay.
That would be a nice bonus.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that says a lot about person. And well, the last question. What would you ask God? One question.
This is an important question too, isn't it?
Yes, especially for you.
Yeah. I think I might want to know, how can I hear you better? Because um, this is one of these important parts of the Christian life. Is I talk about this in class oftentimes, so it probably sounds familiar. Thinking like there's a relationship that God desires to have with us, and relationships involve communication. And I've often found communication to be one of the hardest pieces of the Christian life to understand and to work out. So there have definitely been times in my life where I felt like God has really clearly communicated with me. But I guess you could say I communicate with Him a lot more than I understand He's communicating with me. And yet I believe that He communicates a lot more than I notice and a lot more than I can really hear and understand. So I think that would be an area where if He could give me some very direct advice or response about that, that would be
Mm-hmm.
helpful.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Well, people who don't know is maybe that you teach class Christian worldview. and there we'll learn so much about secular and Christian views of life and how they relate to each other, how differ from each other. So if anyone who is seeing this would like to know more about um, how secular view, secular is similar as atheism, if I'm not wrong, Mr. John.
There's overlap there. They're not the same thing, but yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yes. With my broken English, it's atheism, and how Christians see it. So this is probably one of the most talked about topics in the world right now, and it has always been. So if anyone really wants to know about that and talk, me and Mr. John maybe even will record another episode talking about just that. Mr. John, this is a wrap up of our podcast, and as a last note, why don't you tell me a question I should ask to my next podcast guest?
Well, I think I was thinking it would be fun if you ended with, for your guest, like, do you have a question for me?
Okay, I will ask that too.
Yeah, and so you consider whether you want to ask that kind of a question to your guests or not. But
Yeah,
that would be,
I
I think, an
see.
interesting question.
All right, Mr. John. Well, goodbye. Thank you so much.